Bum, 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 bum. I always do the little intro and try to time it exactly when it starts, and I was so close for this episode of Disguise Coverage. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Disguise Coverage. I of course am your host, Anthony. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant, and if you are observant and or just pay attention in general, you will have noticed, see, there's Greg's got the observant eyes going on right there. You will have noticed that I either said the word us, or if you're watching the video, that again, I'm not alone. I am joined by Greg Tompsett of the Cover One Buffalo podcast.
Yo, yo, yo.
Welcoming himself there. He's a fan of the show, friend of the show, part of the Cover One team. And Greg, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but the Buffalo Bills have a playoff game this weekend against the Baltimore Ravens.
I noticed that. I did. Right? I saw that. I saw someone left me a Post-it note.
Oh, that's you know what a good person that person is to look out for you like that.
It was nice.
I hadn't heard of it. I don't really follow the Bills or just kind of sports in general.
You're so focused on the Sabres?
Yeah, I was really focused on the Sabres. Greg and I are both kind of focused on the Sabres. As you can see, Greg's rocking the Jack Eichel sweater tonight. I'm rocking a Bills hoodie. The game hasn't gone too great so far, but we'll see what happens in the third period. Things could turn around. Greg hockeys a lot. He loves it. He knows a ton about it. It's great to see.
I'm a subject matter expert. I'm trying to share my knowledge with the people. And really just kind of pretending my way through it. It's been great.
That should have been my senior quote, and or what they should put on my tombstone. Just pretending my way through life. It's a great way to go.
It's honestly underrated.
It is super underrated. You're underrated. The show is underrated. Cover One is underrated.
Let's go.
And as we start to turn things on a more serious note, yes, the Buffalo Bills play the Baltimore Ravens this weekend in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, which is extremely exciting. We are in the midst of really getting into the thrall of playoff season, the Elite Eight here. And the Bills have a matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. And as I was speaking to Greg offline before this episode started, the reason I wanted to bring Greg on, aside from his boyish good looks and charm and everything that he knows, is Greg and I, between Twitter and several episodes that we have done throughout the Cover One universe, throughout the regular season and a little into the playoffs, the conversation of who you want to face in the playoffs and what road do you want to go to a Super Bowl? How do things line up? Greg and I had this discussion several times, and it was interesting to see what other people think and how the thoughts come together for everyone, because there were so many people that were just dead set against playing Baltimore. I don't want Baltimore. I don't want any parts. I don't want any parts. And I think you and I were pretty aligned in terms of, we would prefer the easiest road possible. So we would like to not have to play certain teams at certain points. But with how good the AFC was, you couldn't really get away with anything too easy. There was no free pass. There was no free pass game. And for as good as the Ravens are, they do have some vulnerability. So it's a game that we would have preferred not to have. But alas, we are here. But the start of this, to really get into things, and if you're watching live or if you're watching the video and all, you're going to see the graphics change there, and you see it says Bills Fan Paranoia. And Greg, I wanted to gain your thoughts on this. I understand how good the Ravens are, and also understand how good the Bills are, but there's just been so many thoughts, whether it's in social media or in real life to a degree. I've had a lot of friends and family who just have this giant sense of impending doom. The sky is falling because we're having to now play the Baltimore Ravens. And how much of that do you think is due to the Ravens itself, or do you think there's some that's still due to the, as it's labeled there, the overall Bills fan paranoia that still exists in our brains because of all that we've been throughout the years?
So there's a piece of that, undeniably. There's a piece of it where people have just convinced themselves that, nothing good can ever happen. There's always another shoe that's going to drop. It's just a matter of time. I would hope that what they've done so far, 13-3, shattering every team record, from an offensive standpoint, and winning a playoff game, winning the division, that would reset some of that for people. But I get it. Some of that stuff's hard to unlearn, and people joke about PTSD. It really is the fan version of it. It really is. It's just it's hard to unlearn those things of here we go again. And I even admitted to it in that moment after the fumble didn't get overturned.
Oof.
There were pieces of me that told myself, oh my gosh, it's going to happen again. I can't believe it. It's going to happen again. So I get it. I don't even want to be dismissive of the people experiencing that and feeling that, because it's real. I would say, I would hope some of this reassures people. I've had that debate a lot of times on Twitter this week about, should you feel less anxiety because we already checked some boxes and did some things, or should you feel more anxiety because it's a higher level of the playoffs and it's further into the playoffs and the stakes are higher? And I certainly feel there's more anxiety for the game, but there's much less of a drop off afterwards if we don't win because we check the boxes. So it's like the safety net, the trapeze net is coming up with us as we go. You're still walking a high wire, but the safety net's coming up with us. It's not that bad. But I get it. Like it's not crazy to feel that way, because 25 years of getting kicked in the gut, you're gonna remember it.
Yeah, it's going to stick with you for a little bit. I second that. I found myself when the Bills went up 24-10, and I was like, okay, like, we just have to make sure the Colts can't score fast. And as I said that, like, Hines busted off like a 30-yard run, and then they scored in like 2.5 minutes. And I was like, okay,
those 50-yard play, that back-to-back plays was just a gut punch. When I thought it was over, I thought 24-10 was the dagger, and it was done. And then it was like, oh, okay, they're not going away.
That's what I was like, they're just going to keep coming. And then the fumble that wasn't called, and which was 1,000% a fumble. And it really is unfortunate because it was such a smart, heady play by Jordan Poyer, and could have been such an awesome moment that we could have looked back on. I think Bills fans still will look back on it, but it's unfortunate that it's kind of been like stricken from the record because it's not going to count because it wasn't labeled as an actual fumble. Yeah. But going into this game with Baltimore, and you've had a lot of great points on the Ravens and who they've beaten and how they've caught fire down the stretch, but the teams that they've beaten and how they've beaten them, do you think the Ravens and the aura that is around them in Bills fans' minds, do you think it is deserved, or do you think a decent amount of it, or granted however much amount of it, is due to the paranoia that exists in Bills fans' minds?
So
hey, I'm hitting you with the deep questions right off the bat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's real though, because Lamar Jackson is the perfect Twitter quarterback, because his highlights translate really, really well, and 140 characters isn't enough to explain why it's not quite like that consistently all the time. So he's perfect to live in that little world of Twitter. He took a step back this year. They didn't have a lot of great games against good teams, but when they played bad teams, they smoked them, and that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to beat bad teams handily. They did that. I would say it was a reason I was unsure last week. Last week's game for the Ravens was a tale of two parts of the ball. Scoring 20 points against a terrible Titans defense isn't all that scary. Holding the Titans offense to 13 points is pretty legit. Like, it's hard to know which part to take seriously there and which part to be afraid of, or which part translated from those blowouts that they had against a really ugly stretch. On the show last night with Aaron, I talked about how the Bills have a top 5 strength of schedule, played some of the most double-digit win teams, the most playoff teams, and did really well in those games against playoff teams, including a couple games, 2-0 against the Dolphins, who were the first team out of the playoffs, on top of their success against playoff teams. The Ravens played very few of them and did kind of iffy in the games they had against them. So I'd like to think that matters, but ultimately, we'll get into some of the matchup things and some of the strengths and weaknesses here. It's not going to be the reason they do or do not win. It's a reason that you have to take some of their results with a grain of salt.
That's a perfect answer, and it's a perfect segue to getting into some of the matchups. And I wanted to pull this comment here as well. My anxiety comes from the Bills stopping or not the run and semi-containing Lamar. That fits in perfectly with the first matchup that we're going to get into here. And the graphic's going to come up. It's Bills defense versus Ravens offense, because the real title that I wanted to give for this graphic was too long to fit into the little box there. How does, in your mind, and I will counter as well as we go into this. How does the presence of the Bills passing defense and the Ravens passing offense, and how inconsistent the Ravens passing offense has been? Again, coming into this game, the Baltimore Ravens are last in the NFL in passing yards per game, averaging 171.2. But that's because they're first in rushing yards per game at 191.9. Do you think the inconsistencies in the passing game for the Ravens are legitimate to the point that the passing game poses no threat and the Bills can stack the box as much as humanly possible? Or is there enough of a threat in the passing game to still pose the idea that we can't go tremendously heavy in the box and we still have to honor that throwing ability?
Okay, so there's a couple pieces there. I would say Ravens fans are concerned with their passing game in the same way that Bills fans are concerned with our running game.
Ooh, good comparison.
Where it's, yeah, we kind of wish it was better, but it doesn't really matter because the other side of it's so good. You know?
Yeah.
And they're not wrong. Like that's not inaccurate. I saw a stat earlier that the Ravens have the most yards per carry in the NFL against light boxes. The Bills have the most light boxes in the NFL and give up the most yards per carry against light boxes. That trio of numbers doesn't net out to great stuff. The one thing I'll say is giving up the most yards per carry of any team in the NFL is 6.1 yards per attempt. That's kind of a scary number. You want to know what Josh Allen does when he has the ball? He throws the ball for 7.9 yards per attempt. So if they want to trade their 6.1 yards per carry for our 7.9 yards per attempt, I'll take that. That's what this is going to come down to. It is going to be an ultimate test of old school football versus modern football, and the nerds will tell you being good at passing the ball is more important than being good at running the ball, and I'm going to hope they're right.
Yeah, that's the kind of the model we have to go with and the mindset to go with. And this one has me so I think the Ravens offense is good. When I look at their passing attack, because again, I recognize what the Bills have been through their run defense. You mentioned the next gen stat of with the Bills D in the light box allowing 6.1 yards per carry, which is last in the NFL, and 51% of the plays on defense for the Bills, they have been in a light box.
We're a nickel team.
We are a nickel team. Nickel is base. Taron Johnson is a linebacker. And when you're looking at that Baltimore offense, they've got some interesting pieces on the outside. Hollywood Brown is tremendously fast. Willie Snead isn't awful. And then you've got like Miles Boykin and Duvernay who does some things. Des Bryant is on this team. I don't know if people honestly know that. He's made that comeback. He's looked kind of all right. But their number one receiving threat is Mark Andrews. They work the tight end a lot. He is their guy. Lamar loves him. He's tremendously reliable, very athletic. And honestly, I think he gets a good amount of press. But if not for the world of Travis Kelce and Darren Waller and George Kittle, Mark Andrews would be an anomaly.
I think he's next. I think he's not in that tier. I don't think he's equivalent to Kelce, Kittle, or even Waller, but I think he's next. I think he's the best one of that next tier of tight ends, and being a top 4, top 5 tight end in the NFL is a good thing.
Yeah, he's in that next tier, and he's a threat, and the Bills have struggled to cover the tight end, and he gives me cause for concern, and he makes me pause when it comes to that passing offense. But when I look on the outside, I don't feel, and I know the Bills don't do a lot of matchup of like Trey's going to cover this guy and travel all over the field with him and things like that. But I feel confident enough in Trey being able to one-on-one lock down whoever gets lined up across from him to the point that it alleviates some of the back-end coverage needed to the point that the Bills can go heavier boxes or 7-man boxes or 8-man boxes to load up against the run as much as possible, because that passing threat, at least on the outside from their receiving weaponry, wide receivers, I don't think that threat is necessarily there to the point that the Bills you have to honor it, but I don't think you have to respect it to the point that you can't go heavy box after heavy box after heavy box and make, I don't want to say completely sell out to stop the run, but not make that your holistic number one hands down priority.
Yeah, it's a fine mix. It's, look at the way that Lamar scored on the Bills last year. It wasn't some like unbelievably amazing schemed play. It was, hey, Lamar got out on two of them. Lamar gets out of the pocket, makes a defender choose between defending him running to the corner or giving up on the receiver going behind him. And then he stops and puts it over him for the touchdown. Then we had, an extra spy, keep an eye on him. There's a miss in coverage like we saw with Jack Doyle last week. And Hayden Hurst runs for a game-breaking touchdown.
61-yard touchy.
It was incredibly frustrating. And I think the Bills' defense has learned from that. But we also need to not kid ourselves. The game plan, the reason that they have the highest percentage of light boxes in the NFL is because they're going to let you run the ball, because running the ball is not as dangerous as passing the ball. It just isn't. I would love to shut everything down and have the steel curtain and throw shutouts and all those things that fans throw around. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're running for first downs. Well, people score in the NFL in 2021. This is just how football works now. And I don't think that trading that to not give up big plays is a bad game plan. What is a bad game plan is giving up a lot of running yards and then biting on play action and then letting Andrews beat you over the top and then letting Hollywood Brown hit a deep one. That's not acceptable. Now, if they go through that and do that and are able to limit all those other pieces and some combination of Edwards, Dobbins, and Lamar Jackson run for 200 yards, the Bills could give that up and win by 14 points. It's just not that big of a deal. We can put up 450 yards if you put up 350 because you're so focused on running the ball. Okay, I'll take that.
We saw that with the Patriots game on Monday night. They put up 221 total yards, and 170 or 80 of it was rushing yards, and that looks terrible. Like, oh my God, you gave up almost 200 yards rushing, but it was but we gave up 220 total, and we won by 29 points. So that's not really
and I'm not anticipating that level of dominance, but that kind of idea that in the grand scheme of things, I'm not worried about them running the ball. I'm worried about them running the ball and hitting some of those play action shots.
It's like you're in my brain. That is literally my worry, that seeing the Michael Pittman screen against Indianapolis, because the Bills bit so hard on that run fake to Taylor, and then it's a dump off to Pittman, and Trey misses the tackle, and Pittman's off for about a 30, 40-yard gain to take into the red zone. And no disrespect to Michael Pittman, but if something like that happens to Hollywood Brown, he can easily take that to the house. And no disrespect to Jack Doyle and Mo Alley Cox from Indianapolis, but Mark Andrews can take things to the house. The ones where Doyle's making the catch and he gets tackled after 17 yards, Andrews could break a tackle or outrun one of your defensive backs and take that to the house, much like he's not as fast as Hayden Hurst, but you mentioned it earlier that he's closer, most definitely. That was a huge play last year in the game against the Ravens. It's a 10-6 game. Lamar hits Hayden Hurst over the middle, roughly at about 15-yard depth, and then Hurst houses it and outruns Hyde and the rest of the defense for a 61-yard touchdown. Those plays scare me more in the passing game, and knowing that they can come, obviously, from the prevalence of the running game and the strength of Baltimore's running game is what scares me more. And going into that and continuing with that, are we, and again, those of you watching the video, you'll see the graphic change on the bottom. Are we just in and of itself, Lamar Jackson, as far as his throwing ability, his arm, the Ravens passing offense, do you think there's a chance we're underestimating it at all in terms of thinking that it has to succeed, it can only succeed, or it will succeed based on the success of the run and how it can feed off of that play action? Do you think we're overlooking it a little bit on its own if you looked at it in a vacuum?
No.
Segment over. Show.
It's not a great passing offense. It's not. So now that doesn't mean it's not a dangerous passing offense. It doesn't mean that there's not things you should be concerned with. And like I said, it's the combination that we do need to be concerned with, that they put together the combination between the running and the passing, and they can have a dangerous offense. Should we do we think we're underestimating their passing offense? No, it's the worst passing offense in the NFL statistically, and it was not terribly efficient. Last year, they shattered all those records from a scoring standpoint because they had the most efficient passing offense in the league with the best rushing offense in the league. Well, once again, they had the best rushing offense in the league and were the first team to go over 3,000 yards rushing in back-to-back seasons since for like over 40 years, since back in the 70s. And doing so, they now step back to a not horrendous but an inefficient regular passing offense for the fewest yards. When you look at some things like DVOA and passing efficiency, Lamar Jackson wasn't the worst quarterback in the NFL. They had by far the fewest attempts as well as the fewest yards, but they weren't horrible from an efficiency standpoint. But their rushing offense was so good that it worked. Now, the thing that I would challenge is a dominant rushing offense is significantly more valuable and more dangerous against bad opponents than it is against really good opponents when you need to outscore them or keep up. So, yes, when you're rolling the Bengals and the Giants and teams like that, sure, it's a dominant piece that can be a huge element of being successful. When you need to step up against a better team and all of a sudden the game script doesn't go your way and you have to pivot, you run into games like the Chiefs game where Lamar throws for 97 yards and they get rolled. It's going to come up. We'll talk about it here when we do, what we're expecting to see. But if the game script gets away from them early, it's tougher for them than it is for Buffalo. I made that case against Indianapolis, that game against the Colts and the Bills could go a couple different ways. If the Bills went up early, it could get ugly. If the Colts go up early, the Bills can still come back because a passing offense will let you still come back. And they did. So it's the same thing here. If Baltimore goes up early, the Bills can still come back. If the Bills go up early, it could get ugly.
Great comment here from Truth to Hearts, and thank you so much for your donation. That is part of what keeps us going. Thank you so much. Tremendously appreciated. Thank you. The comment here, the Ravens' run game is their haymaker and the passing is their jab. You can win with the jab. I agree their passing game can be effective. And I think to build, that goes hand in hand with your point there, Greg. I think on its own, in a vacuum, if we're sitting here knowing, again, if we can get up or if we just know that the passing game is the way they have to beat us, I'm not fearful of that. I know Lamar made some plays in the passing game last week, but I saw that first interception against Tennessee, and he just hasn't been on point this year. I think what we saw from Lamar last year in his passing was, and not to take away from the year that he had, but you knew that the year that he put up last year, he was going to have to regress towards the mean in some way, shape, or form. He was throwing
and regress isn't even a shot at him. He had one of the most efficient seasons in NFL history when he was the MVP. Of course he was going to regress a little bit because no one in NFL history had ever kept up that pace. So it doesn't mean he was bad this year. It just means he wasn't historically good.
Exactly. He was putting up like 24 passes, completing 16, and throwing 4 touchdowns out of those 16 completions. Just numbers that were unreal and just not sustainable from a real-life NFL perspective or a fantasy football perspective, as a lot of fantasy owners found out this year if they took Lamar in the first 3 rounds and it came back to bite you. But yeah, I'm worried about it, as we said in the last segment, I'm worried about it from the perspective of if the running game is getting us to the point that we're starting to sell out a little bit and biting on that play action. I'm more worried about the play action crossing route completion to Mark Andrews happening regularly than I am the straight drop back. Lamar has to read the defense and fit something into a tight window or any window to one of his receivers. That worries me less holistically. Again, I think it comes down to, as you mentioned, and again, you and I are in alignment here, it comes off of that running game. And it's been talked about all week. It's been talked about on the internet and on the radio and social media and all those things. That Ravens running game is their bread and butter, and everything is built off of that and drives off of that and feeds off of that. And that leads us into our next segment here, most important things. As we come into this game, you can have multiple, you can have one, however many you'd like. What is your most important thing or things needed to be done on the Bills' end for them to come away with a win in this game?
So I think the most important thing in the entire game, what's going to decide the entire game, is Josh Allen's ability to beat the blitz.
Okay.
If the Ravens bring the blitz and it converts to pressures, every quarterback is worse against pressure than they are when they're clean. I think people equate bringing the blitz to equating to pressure, and it doesn't always. So, as an example, the Ravens are number 1 in the NFL in the most blitzes. They're actually pretty good in pressure. Not number 1 and the most inefficient, but it's certainly influenced by the fact that they blitz the most. So, of course, it'd be inefficient because you're bringing it all the time. So, there's some noise in those numbers.
And as far as sacks, the Ravens only have 1 more than the Buffalo Bills on the year. They have 39. The Bills have 38.
Correct. So, when you look at the highest blitzing team in the NFL, but only 39 sacks, which is pretty good, but not special, it tells you that there are some times in some games where they bring a bunch of blitzes and it doesn't get home. Well, before Josh Allen, and for anybody who isn't aware, we have a new member of Cover One and part of the portfolio.
Fantastic.
So Max Robleski is a big piece of the team. You can see him at Mafia Numbers on Twitter. He did a bunch of really good work looking at the transition of Josh versus cover 0 last year to cover 0 this year, and how huge of a jump, like 31st, 38th, 32nd, 35th in every measurable category, to this year, 2nd, 4th, 8th, 2nd in just about every measurable category. So that's, in my mind, that will decide the game, because that is the Ravens' number 1, number 2, and number 3 weapon on defense, is confusing guys, bringing the blitz, all those different things, needing it to get home to create plays, and getting you off your base to be able to do everything that they need to set up the positive game scripts and all the other pieces. Going through that, if it gets home and gets Josh off his base and he reverts back to what he did in that game last year, for anybody who was on NFL Network today, I rewatched a big chunk of it. It's infuriating to watch how many throws Josh missed last year. It was possibly his worst game of the season. This year, he's number 1 in the NFL of just about every stat against the blitz. Touchdown passes, yards, completion percentage. That's the game. It's, can the Ravens pressure get home? Can Josh beat it? That's the most important thing in this game. I almost think the rest of the game, there's very few game scripts that can matter if Josh beats that. And I think there's very few game scripts that can matter if the Ravens beat Josh and get home with that pressure and it is bothering him. I don't know that anything else is going to overcome it, because if he's beating it, the Ravens' run game isn't keeping up. If he's not beating it, the Bills' running game isn't saving us. That's going to decide the game.
That was you hit it right on the head at the end. That was my follow-up to your point there, because I think there's going to be a lot in terms of what's the most important thing. I feel like if you ranked them like 1 through 5 or whatever, there's going to be a lot of similarity in terms of the overall top 5. But I think though number 1 and 2, or 1A, 1B, is going to be Josh Allen against the blitz, and then the Bills defense versus the Ravens running game. You would say that the Bills passing attack versus the Ravens blitz hands down trumps the matchup of the Bills run defense succeeding against the Ravens rushing offense.
So I was half joking earlier when, talking about the nerds and the football intelligentsia, the analytics crowd, when they say passing matters more than rushing. They're not wrong. Like, yes, maybe they're heavy-handed with it. Maybe they go over the top. The people who try to say you should pass every single play, that you should never run the ball, that's always a horrible idea to run. But a really good passing game beats a really good running game 10 times out of 10 in the modern NFL. It just does. You score more points, you move the ball faster, you can't keep up. It just doesn't work the same. So if the Bills are beating that Ravens defense and the Ravens run game is beating the Bills offense, I trust that eventually they're going to trip up and have an issue with something, that they get into a negative game script. And then all of a sudden, when the Bills have a penalty and get into 1st and 15, what do you think? Okay. Whatever, it's like getting 15 yards isn't that big of a deal with our offense. That's not that big a deal. When the Bills were against the Broncos and it was 1st and goal from the 30, you want to turn to my mom and said, it's fine, they're still going to score. Don't get me wrong, this is annoying. I wish they didn't do that. It's fine, they're still going to score. If the Ravens get off script If the Ravens get a negative play on first down and it's 2nd and 12, or they get a penalty right off the bat, all of a sudden it changes your playbook. It changes what's going on. So all of a sudden, a good drive for the Ravens that you get into a weird spot at the 40, and now all of a sudden you get knocked back and you're at the 44 and it's 2nd and 14. They have way fewer plays to go to. If the Bills have that happen and it goes to 2nd and 14, we're going to run our offense because that's what we do. And if we connect on a pass, it's going to convert regardless. So it's that kind of setup that if it's clicking and going well, our good passing offense beats their good running offense. And that's why I think it's going to decide the game.
I agree with you, and you stole my thunder because a lot of what you said is what I have in my notes. So I holistically agree. Yeah, that matchup for me dictates it because, again, I think that to your point, the adjustment that's needed if their running game is doing things, Baltimore's going to have a harder time adjusting if they get behind the sticks or if they get down early or if they run into scenarios where they face some sort of obstacle or hurdle or roadblock. It's easier for the Bills to adjust just based off of their nature of who they are and what their strength is and what their success is. And to your point, and leading with that joke, it's supported by the analytics community and the numbers, and just today's NFL, what you see with the top offenses, not that they can't run the ball, but who are your top offenses in the NFL? They're coming out and they're just throwing the ball ridiculously. The Chiefs and the Packers and the Bills. The Packers, it cost me a fantasy football championship because their goal line offense is throw the ball to Devontae Adams 4 times, even if you're on the 1, because they know at the end of the day, this guy's better, or it's harder to stop this than it is to stop the run. So we're just going to keep going to this until somebody stops it, and it's harder to stop that, especially with how the game is constructed nowadays and how rules benefit the passing game and the quarterback, and just so much it's easier to see why a prevalent and successful passing offense is a bigger key than stopping that Ravens running game. I also want to put in there as a close number 3 for me, because I got Bills passing offense against the Ravens blitz, Bills rushing defense against the Ravens rushing offense. Third down conversions and turnovers are something that are massive for me in this game. Someone commented on it earlier. I wish I could go back to it, but there's been a million comments since then, so I apologize. Forgive me. The Bills going, I believe it was 2 for 9 against Indianapolis last week, really got to me, especially seeing them on a couple where Zach Moss got like an 8-yard run on first down, and it was 2nd and 2, and then we ran the ball twice on 2nd and 2 and 3rd and 1 and couldn't get a first down. We couldn't get a first down on 3rd and 1 at another point in the game. Not being able to...
Well, even that combination, going 2 of 9 isn't good. That's never good. But going 2 of 9 in a muddy game where neither team is converting isn't the end of the world.
Yes.
Going 2 of 9 when your opponent is going 9 of 17 and even 8 of those misses, they converted on 2 more fourth downs.
Yep.
So 11 of those 17, you ended up giving up a first down. That's unacceptable. Matter of fact, that's mind-blowing that the Bills won that game with that differential of conversions on drives, that they converted and finished 9 times that they converted that, and the Bills were 2 out of 9. That's really, really impressive. That differential can't happen again, even if we'd prefer that the 2 of 9 by itself doesn't happen again.
Exactly. That's where, again, you're in my brain. That's where I was going with it. The not being able to sustain drives. And it's one thing if you're not converting third downs, but it doesn't matter because you keep getting first downs on first and second down every time. Like I recognize
which the Bills did plenty this year.
Right, which is fair. But not being able to sustain drives, and i.e. if you're sustaining drives, you're most likely getting some kind of points at the end of a drive, whether field goal, touchdown, something like that. If you are unable to sustain drives against the Ravens, and then on the flip side, you are allowing them to convert third downs or them to continue to sustain drives, that is a thing that scares me when you put those in tandem, because their rushing offense, it's good in the short yardage. Even with that, the stat that came along with the Bills light box scenario, I think Dobbins and Gus Edwards have really good rushing results against loaded boxes and what they're doing against heavy fronts. They're able to get short yardage. They're able to get tough yards, in addition to the bigger explosive plays and explosive runs that Lamar can bust off, or even Dobbins can bust off because he has some good long distance speed. That combination worries me. If we are struggling to sustain drives and we get into a field position discrepancy like we got against Indianapolis, where every drive was starting against the 35 and the 40 for Indy, and we were starting within our own 15 and our own 10 because we couldn't get first downs, we couldn't move the ball. And granted, we weren't giving up a ton of points, but then Indy on the other side was getting a couple first downs at least, and then they'd punt around midfield. That worries me against Baltimore more than it does against Indy because of what it conveys and the actual X's and O's and logistics of the game, but then the emotion and the mental aspect of it with Baltimore, we saw the mental side creep in against Tennessee, and Baltimore doesn't forget anything. They are a nasty group of dudes. They're cocky. They're arrogant. They talk. The last thing I want to do is allow them to pump their chest and get up even more than they're already up and getting a couple 3-and-outs or getting some stops on third down while Lamar and that offense is just grinding out first. That worries me in this game.
Yeah, yes, I agree completely that if the game script gets away from the Bills, I think they have an explosive offense that can come back, but the Ravens also can pile up points quickly. If they get into a spot where they know you're passing all the time, where you know that they're trying to run, they can put up a ton to be able to go through and put up points very, very quickly. And it can be a huge stress on this game and make it incredibly difficult to come back. So early on in the game is going to be critical. Getting an early lead is going to be critical. Those different pieces are going to be enormous to this game. I do think that, your point on the conversions are huge. The Bills were actually, the best third down and fourth down team in the NFL throughout the regular season.
49%.
Being able to convert at that rate is critical to bring that back and not struggle with that again. The way that they let the Colts dominate time of possession and all those different pieces and all the different crazy stats of the Colts were the first team to lose, and then you can list off like 5 or 6 different things that happened in that game. The people who stomp on that, well, football is a game that really comes down to 6 or 8 critical plays. That was the best example you could possibly have. Was the Bills crushed it on 6 to 8 critical plays in that Colts game. They won all 8 of those critical plays, and the Colts dominated and controlled the vast majority of that game. That's the kind of thing that I don't think the Colts and the Ravens are terribly different. I think that there are certain things that the Ravens have the recipe to win this game. They have an offense that's the best at what the Bills defense does the worst. That's not great. They have a really aggressive defense that can get after the quarterback and make things difficult. They're opportunistic and get turnovers. If you get a positive game script for them, they're front runners in the best way to use that term. Like they're really, really good when they're out in the lead and, like you said, confident, puffing their chest out, rolling with it. They're really, really good in those scenarios and are in a position where that's going to be a really positive thing for them to be able to come back on. But that's the path they need. Several other elements of this game, if they don't go that way, it's going to be tough for them to be able to find a path, and that's why you saw them struggle in some of the games with stronger opponents. So it's going to be interesting to see where that comes about. The toxic differential that Aaron and I spend a lot of time tracking will be big. Who gives up more big plays? Who has those turnovers? Stealing extra possessions? Things like that will be big. But ultimately, like I said, I think you were spot on kind of your matchups to watch, and that's what's going to really drive this game.
To bring in one last thing and circle back here, we started talking about the Bills passing offense and the Ravens defense and how they're going to blitz and come after Allen based on percentage and statistic. I mean, for all we know, they could come into this game and decide, nope, we're only going to rush 3 and we're going to drop 8 every single time.
It's crazy.
I feel like, again, because I do have that Bills fan paranoia creeping in the back of my brain, I don't fear if the Ravens come out and want to do man-on-man, they want to go man coverage, they want to go cover 0 or cover 1, whatever they're doing, I like that matchup for the Bills so much. I don't fear Stephon Diggs in a one-on-one matchup against the Baltimore corners, any of them. Respect to Marlon Humphrey and how good that he is. Respect to Marcus Peters, who I will say is a very taking corner and will put himself out of position in order to try and generate a turnover, which can leave him vulnerable to bigger plays and be able to be beat in certain situations.
Like
But
when J.C. Jackson tried to jump a pass and underestimated Josh Allen's arm strength, and then Stephon Diggs turned up the field for a 50-yard touchdown.
House call. That was beautiful. After J.C. Jackson was kind of running his mouth like a couple series before, and then Diggs was like, all right, I'm going to get you, and then he got him.
I've already predicted that play happens, that Marcus Peters is going to think he can jump a route for Josh Allen, is going to underestimate how ridiculous Josh Allen's arm strength is, and is going to undercut it and miss, and Stephon Diggs is going to turn upfield for a huge gain.
Oh, I'd like that. I'd take that. I hope it comes at the end when the Bills are already up by like 30. Yeah, I don't, especially if Cole Beasley is a little healthier this week, which all reports indicate that he is. That matchup inside
he said it,
of
so
Cole,
I'm going to believe it.
Yeah, I'll take it. Anything, Cole, whatever Cole Beasley tells me, he could tell me he's riding a Velociraptor to work, and I'll believe him because I love him so much. I don't fear that matchup. I don't think what Beasley is good at and what Diggs is good at, and then having John Brown is like the tertiary option, even though he's played at times like a wide receiver 1 or a high end 2. I don't fear the Ravens coverage aspect against the Bills receiving weaponry. I think the blitz is very legitimate, and there, for as much as the production hasn't been there for Ngakoue and the rest of the upfront crew, Calais Campbell is a monster. Ngakoue still has it in him. Matthew Judon is very good coming off the edge. Even Pernell McPhee and Queen is good on coming on the blitz. Tyus Bowser, their front 7 can get after it, but I'm not fearful of the back end locking down or giving problems for the Bills receivers. And I know Marlon Humphrey's coming off of an all-pro year, and he's a very good corner. He was in that upper echelon this offseason. We were talking about who's going to get paid and whose contract is going to be what between Trey and Jalen Ramsey and Marlon Humphrey, and he was thrown in that mix. But I don't fear their coverage unit against our wide receivers.
Yeah, it's with their schedule and who they played, it's really hard to know exactly where that falls because, the Chiefs passing game tore them up pretty good. The Steelers, when they were playing well early in the year, did okay, but it wasn't a huge passing game. The Titans in their loss actually was a pretty good pass. Corey Davis and A.J. Brown both had big games. So it's not as though they've shut everyone down all year, but they're darn good. Like those, they're 3 really good cornerbacks. I think a big piece of it's going to come with what the referees are allowing in the game. Sometimes you see those tone setting penalties early in the game where they let them know like, hey, we're not going to let you be handsy all day. Don't be crazy. In the Colts game, they were letting quite a bit of physical contact go. They were in both ways. Like there were several plays where the Bills could have got called for defensive pass interference and didn't. And it was relatively consistent across the board. If they're letting the Ravens secondary be pretty handsy during the game, you're talking about a really strong trio. To having Jimmy Smith and Humphrey and Peters is as good of a trio as you're going to get in the NFL. And if they can get handsy, they can give the receivers a problem because we don't have any like physical specimens. We don't have any DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, those kind of guys that are just going to physically dominate the other guy. We have technicians that, create space, have phenomenal footwork, and get open against everybody, assuming you have to play by the rules and you can't grab guys to slow them down. So if they don't let that happen, I do think it neutralizes a bit of their skill. I think Humphrey's good no matter what. He has really good feet and is going to keep up and do a good job relatively. Smith and Peters, I think, are going to rely more on being able to do that. Peters is kind of a risk taker if he gets a good read on Josh's eyes. Josh has improved tremendously this year on, looking guys off and then going back to a play. Hopefully that can translate well. So I think it would be dismissive to assume that, no secondary can guard our receivers. I think that that's true to a point, that we have the depth at wide receiver going down with Diggs, Beasley, Brown, and Davis. it's pretty freaking hard to be able to keep up with them for a whole game. But if anybody's going to do it, Baltimore has the horses to make a run at it. So I anticipate there will be enough. I love the combination of our receivers with Brian Dable and the creativity. His ability to scheme up protections to create space, I think, is going to give Josh just enough. And now Josh's progression of not getting tricked is going to be key. So I think eventually they're going to settle into a rhythm. Maybe it's an ugly first quarter. Maybe it takes a minute and a couple drives. I don't know that we're going to jump out and score on the first possession every single time. It might take a minute to figure out what they're doing and what they're trying to disguise in their muddled blitzes, their different false keys of who's coming back and forth. But if they get a beat on that, then I think the receivers will start to make some hay and they'll get the ball moving.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't want to make it seem as though I'm completely discrediting that secondary because they are a strong unit. I just like how what we can potentially do against them shakes out with how they've been this year. And one thing I'm also interested to see in that secondary is Humphrey and where he lines up. He has the ability to play some slot, which he's done at times, especially when was it Tavon Young, I believe, was their slot corner the last couple years for the Ravens, and he went down, and Humphrey is filled in the slot at times. He's much more equipped out there than Peters is, or even Jimmy Smith is, I would say, to a degree. It's going to be an intriguing matchup, and I think if we can handle the blitz aspect up front, much like we did against Indianapolis on that touchdown to Diggs over the top. Granted, the corners that will be covering the Bills receivers are much better than what the Colts are running out there, especially when Rhodes got banged up for a little bit. I think that matchup can favor the Bills a little bit. If we can block it up front and scheme for it and know what's coming, I think we can get them over the top eventually. And if we start to get into that rhythm, exactly like you said, I like our chances. Do the plan and script that Baltimore wants, or does it go to the script that the Bills want? Or are we still in a neutral holding pattern where at the end of the first it's like 3-0 or 7-3 and there's not really anything that's happened that can dictate to a team, all right, we got to change things up because our original plan isn't going to work now because situation A has happened. We have to go to our contingency plans. That first quarter is going to be so huge in terms of deciding how this game is going to go.
Absolutely.
As we go into that, we've spoken a little bit on Josh Allen here and there, and it's hard not to with the role that he's been playing for the Bills and how good he's been. And I saw a couple comments in this episode from the people here lauding Josh Allen about him being the savior and how great that he is.
All true.
All true. And he looks great in shorts. What does a win do for Josh Allen in terms of where it puts him in the echelon of QBs or how he's perceived in the national media or how he's perceived in general? Does a win do something for him? Does it not? I say that because I feel like going into this game, and to a degree rightfully so, Baltimore's getting a lot of love for what they've been doing and how they handled Derrick Henry and how good Lamar looked on that touchdown run from midfield and how he outran Adoree Jackson, who runs like a 4.2 40 for the Titans. And this game, if Josh Allen can put some things together and if the Bills win, we know it's a quarterback-driven league, and even though wins aren't a QB stat, Bruce Nolan, QBs get credit for those wins. Does a win here for the Bills and for Josh Allen, does it vault him into some sort of upper echelon status and kind of cement and or solidify where he is? Or is it just kind of another thing to, put on the record, but it doesn't do too much for him?
So there would have been a point where I would have told you this was enormous and the difference maker from a perception standpoint. When you have so many people talking about how dangerous he is and how incredible he's played, making the case for him for MVP, talking about why he's must watch, and all the crazy breakdowns you see from some really smart people in the NFL football world. I don't know that it's quite the make or break that it was at one point, but I will say to be in that truly elite class and to be considered at that level, you have to win these kind of games, and you have to go on a playoff run, per se. Getting another win here, you're talking about getting himself into a 500-plus record in the playoffs. You're talking about getting to an AFC championship game at 24 years old. You're talking about going head-to-head with Patrick Mahomes and having a chance to have a Super Bowl on the line. Like, those kind of things are where you get into that really special space. So Josh has already graduated to a pretty, I'll say, shocking level of respect within the league, especially throughout this year. Just some of his play was undeniable from that standpoint, that I don't think it was that, hey, he needs to play great in this game to shut those people up. Because honestly, there's not that many people trashing him right now. Like, most people are talking about how good Josh Allen is. So from that standpoint, I don't think it's necessarily the make or break. What it does do is solidifies those things. What it does do is launch him into a really special space where now, from a media standpoint in the offseason, you're going to get a special Venn diagram for Josh. So you're going to have the Bills fans who are always going to laud him as the savior. You're going to have the analytics people who are going to show him as this historic, literally unprecedented progression that they've just never been seen before. From the fantasy community, you're going to have, he's the number one quarterback and the number one fantasy asset in football this year. He scored the most fantasy points in most formats for anything. And then you're going to get the old school football guys who are going to be more quarterback wins, playoff success, all those different things. You're going to get to a pretty special space where nobody's making a case against Josh Allen. So he's got a shot to put himself into that really special tier where, honestly, only Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes live. Like, where there's guys that you just don't poke any holes in because everyone agrees universally they're exceptional.
Yes.
He's got a chance to put himself in that tier.
I like that a lot. I see it similarly as well. It's such an intriguing thing to me because Mahomes, Rodgers, you've got Brady and Breeze and the quarterbacks that the league loves to laud and talk about and put on national TV and praise and hold up and put on this pedestal. But they're always looking for that next QB, that next run of who are the young gunslingers that we can build around and televise and give marketing to and sponsorship and all these things. And Mahomes is that guy. He has earned it. And last year, after what Lamar did, he got so much of that. Everybody was on that hype train, and rightfully so. He was electric, and the things that he was doing in the running game and the numbers that he was generating, everything that he was pulling off was just so tremendously exciting and electrifying, and hadn't been done since we'd seen the likes of Michael Vick and all these comparisons and everything that he was doing. And going into this game, we keep hearing about the talks about the draft class and how, three of the final four in the AFC are, Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And Lamar, for the year that Josh has had, for as great as it is, I think the perception amongst the national media and fans outside of Buffalo is that Lamar Jackson is still the king of his draft class. And after Patrick Mahomes, he's that dude. And he hasn't had a great year, but he's still that guy. And I think a win here for Josh Allen, exactly to your point there, could put him into that next tier, into that regular conversation. And at the very least, I think it vaults him over Lamar and stamps his, I don't want to say legacy, but legacy as the best quarterback coming out of that draft class. And it gets him into that conversation a little bit more and starts to get the ball rolling behind him and a little more support for, does the AFC belong to Mahomes and Allen? Are Mahomes and Allen the next duo of QB to take over for Rodgers and Brady and Breeze and so on and so forth? It's a really interesting dynamic to me because, again, it's Josh Allen, it's a Bills quarterback. And to think that we could have a guy on the Bills after all these years of quarterback futility and not having the guy, that we could have the guy. Because if not for Patrick Mahomes, I think Josh Allen would be like the young guy in the NFL at this point, or at least in that conversation. It's really intriguing when you start to think about what it does for him in national perception in terms of national attention.
Well, I mean, you've got a chance here where you had that stretch in the, from 2000 to 2010 that decade where it was Manning versus Brady, and you also had runs from Roethlisberger, and you also had runs from Rivers, and you also had some other special runs within the conference. But you have a chance to have a really special stretch here where it's two organizations with really good coaches, with a young quarterback locked up for a long time, the GM locked up for a long time, the head coach locked up for a long time, talent around them, that this could be going back and forth. And I think the Ravens have a chance to do that. I think Eric DeCosta is a good GM. I think Harbaugh is a good coach. I think there's still some things needed on that team to round out the skill set. I think some of those offensive weapons haven't quite clicked the way that it had been planned from a Baltimore standpoint.
And their line got banged up this year big time, and Yanda retired.
Yeah, Yanda, and then obviously losing Stanley was enormous. So getting him back will be a huge uptick for Baltimore next year. So all those different things, you have a chance for something pretty special here. And I'll even say, I think that draft class talk is getting rightfully a lot of attention right now. But overall, this can also put Josh at the head of, or even ahead of, that other tier where people talk about, Russell Wilson or Kyler Murray or other players like that, where he could even be that next guy from the other quarterbacks that are out there in that elite tier.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing to think about and start to discuss and put in your brain. And what's even more important with it, if Josh beats Lamar in this game, Lamar has an MVP. He's electrifying. The Ravens are good. People still believe in them. If Josh Allen gets that win, again, I disagree with that notion in and of itself because wins are not a QB stat. I am a very staunch defender of that. I don't want anybody to get it twisted. But if Josh can get that win, that means we're going to the AFC Championship, where the Bills will either face the Cleveland Browns, and you have the number one quarterback who was taken in that draft class, and Allen could potentially further separate himself from the rest of his class with a win there, or it sets up an opportunity for the Bills to play the Chiefs, and Josh Allen, as the media would put it, to be able to beat two MVP quarterbacks in back-to-back weeks and lead his team to the Super Bowl. There is the bigger picture, and rightfully so, is the Bills. Can we get to a Super Bowl? Can we win a championship? But that underlying storyline of Josh Allen conquering potential MVP quarterbacks and what it does to his status in the NFL and in the league, and then as we get to the offseason in terms of his salary cap number and his contract and what deal he signs, it's
many Pagula bucks. So many Pagula bucks.
And he can cash them all in at Sabres games, Bills games, wherever he wants. It's a really interesting thing to see how that will tie together and what it leads to, because I know it's not priority one and it's not storyline number one, and nor should it be, but it's something that can be a real big story within the Bills and within the NFL this offseason and in the coming years if he beats Lamar and then can get the Bills to a Super Bowl. But in and of itself, if he beats Lamar, it's a big accomplishment, especially with how this defense is being lauded and appreciated. And again, we haven't thrown out a lot of stats on this episode of Disguised Coverage, which we normally do to a degree. But the Ravens defense, they are very good. They are 6th in passing yards per game at 221 yards per game. They're 8th in rushing yards per game allowed at 108.8. They are 2nd in the NFL at allowing 18.9 points per game. They're a good unit, and they get after it, and they're being talked about rightfully so. And if Josh can get that win and then beat Lamar Jackson and we see what happens, it's very intriguing.
Yeah. 100% on board.
That's going to bring us to the end of this episode of Disguised Coverage. As you can tell by the Toodles, you guys, that is my favorite thing. Greg, I know you're a big fan of the phrase Toodles. I love it. Oh, I like the way you said it. I might go high voice with it from now on.
I in my mind, Toodles goes with a finger wave. I don't know if it's just the way that my mind translates that, is that Toodles goes with the finger wave and a high pitch. Toodles.
I kind of like it. I feel like yours is more like taunting, like you just beat somebody on the court and they have to walk off and then you're like Toodles, and it's kind of like an extra little like kick rocks.
That is my energy.
I like it. That makes complete sense. You are that guy. Greg, I appreciate you as always for coming on the show. You are tremendous and an awesome asset to the team and to myself and to Cover One and Bills Mafia and content creators all throughout the content creation community.
Very kind. Thank you.
I try. So why don't you tell the people where they can find you and what you do and your likes and dislikes, list of fears, how you like to sleep, if you're a on the back, on the side kind of guy, how many pillows you use, all that kind of stuff.
Everything. I'm a Taurus. I like long walks on the beach. So it's something that, you guys can find me having a good time on Twitter. I try to have fun with Bills fans all the time. I'm trying to learn about hockey. I don't really understand hockey. I pretend. I try to at least be witty and have fun with it and make jokes about it. But I am trying. I'm not even joking. I'm legitimately trying to learn about hockey. Like, for real. I'm reading books and trying to teach myself about hockey. So that I can learn. I like to learn things. So that's where my energy is right now, is fully focused on the Buffalo Bills and enjoying this run and every second of it. And then I'm going to try to learn a little bit about hockey after the Bills season is done. I will take away none of my energy from the Bills when this is going on. And I hope everyone is following you. For anyone who's listening here, Anthony, you've been a phenomenal addition to the team. I know we couldn't be happier with everything that you've brought, and certainly have made us feel fantastic about our leap of faith of asking you to come aboard. You've been a fantastic asset in joining the team. We're overjoyed.
Oh man, I wasn't expecting that. That's awesome. I think I want to just cut it there and be like, that's it, goodbye. Oh, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I
appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate you and the team, and I've said it a lot, probably through every episode. I am tremendously grateful to be a part of the Cover One team. It's something that I aspired to in the podcasting game and content creation. So to be here and to have the respect and appreciation from you and Eric and Aaron and the team, and to be a part of such, great, knowledgeable football minds, it's a massive thing for me, and I'm tremendously grateful and tremendously appreciative. And as I am, and as Greg is, of everyone who joined us for this episode, whether you were live, whether you were in the comments, whether you're watching the video stream later, the audio only, whatever format you choose, thank you so much for riding with us on this episode. It means a lot to us. Without everybody supporting us and commenting and the donations and the listens and the downloads and everything, we are nothing without you guys. So we appreciate you tremendously from the bottom of our hearts. You will never know truly just how much we value you guys. Thank you so much for riding with us. Again, I am Anthony. Find me on Twitter at @pro__Ant. Find Discoverage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook. While you're there, check out all the great Cover One content. Check out the Cover One Buffalo podcast with Greg and Aaron. Check out the Huff podcast with Sterling, Anthony Romeo, and Eric B. Follow Greg. Follow the whole team. Everybody stay calm. We have a Bills playoff game in a couple of days. Everything will be okay. Keep the faith. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next week.
Go Bills.